Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Left Lane Zoomers. Today, I have a special guest with me. This is Joe Messina from the Radicalize Me podcast on Spotify, Apple, and what's the website again that you mentioned?
The website is radicalizemepod.com.
Cool. So, I first started communicating with Joe a little bit over Twitter a few months ago, I think it was, and I also never got to thank you for, kind of putting me into the loop on that glorious August week, no comrade under 1K thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm happy to help anyone out. I'm
Yeah.
still working my way up too. So
Yeah. But I made it to I think I made it to like 1,500 at this point.
oh shit,
And both my personal Twitter went from like around 100 followers up to like over 1K within that week, as well as like the brand new Twitter account I had for this show.
nice.
And that was really cool. And another reason why I bring that up is because, needless to say, the left has kind of been tearing itself apart on Twitter as of late. I'm sure you've seen plenty of it. And it's just like, I'm like thinking back to hashtag no comrade under 1K. I was like, I want to see that kind of goodwill amongst the left again.
Right.
And I was listening to your most recent episode on Spotify, um, which it was 2 days after or at least it was uploaded 2 days after the insurrection.
Yeah.
But you were talking about how like people like Brianna Joy Gray, Virgil Texas, Socialist MMA, like those were some of the names you mentioned. Jimmy Dore, uh, they had kind of gone into this thing where it's like anyone who wasn't calling AOC a fraud was like a fake leftist or whatever.
Right.
And then we learned as of very recent, due to some like leaked Slack messages, that the whole thing was intended. You know, whether or not you think force the vote is a good idea or not, I think in some ways it could be a good idea, and we can talk about that as well. Like the whole hashtag was created by the Movement for People's Party to essentially just discredit progressives in the Democratic Party to move progressive voters to their side. And
Yeah. Well,
like, yeah,
if you don't mind me jumping in, the someone pointed out recently, that guy Ryan Knight, who I forget where he sort of comes from, but like he's this online left dude. I think he might be a journalist. Um, but he was like very anti-left apparently like a couple of years ago. He was one of these like anti-Bernie people, and really like talk down to the left when we were sort of like finally starting to have a voice. And then now
yeah,
we've got like some left-leaning people at least in Congress who are coming out of Justice Dems and everything. uh he's like, oh, I'm actually further left and they're bad. And it's like, well, it's interesting how you're always seem to be on the side that's fighting against having leftists in Congress.
Well, I've been following Ryan Knight for like pretty much ever since I got on Twitter. So he started out where I was, kind of like we were very like resistance libs,
Mhm.
you know. And it's not so much he was anti-left, like and I actually am not I don't hate Ryan Knight, and like I'm fascinated by him more than anything because it seems like his political awakening and his political evolution has kind of mirrored mine in a way. So like we both started out in a position where we were both very progressive in principle and in policy, but we had like a kind of a centrist worldview,
Right.
and it took us a long time to figure out that the Democratic Party is not so much left. And he was for most of the primary, he was an Elizabeth Warren supporter, but at the point when it looked like Bernie actually could win, that's when he switched to Bernie, and that's when he started changing his name to Proud Socialist instead of Proud Resistor.
Right.
And so, like, as much as like I've increasingly been disagreeing more and more with Ryan Knight. I honestly do think he's more or less acting out of good faith. I don't consider him to be one of the Jimmy Dore type grifters. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's I get a different vibe from him too, and I don't know that much about him, so it sounds like you have a better idea. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's just crazy, like um the the Jimmy Dore thing, and the Breonna Joy Gray and all those people. Um, it's just uh I I I just wrote something about this, right? Like I think the term that came to me was like they just feeding into this like toxic sort of uh hate cycle. Like it's just it's just this sort of thing. Like if you watch a lot of the far right commentators, that's what they do. And the worst of them, I think, encourage people to like go storm the Capitol. But like then you've got, you know, people like Ben Shapiro, the sort of like far right, but like middle far right, people who are just
yeah,
like eating like an anger spiral. Like there's no sort of here's what we can do, and here's like, here's a better idea. And that's what I get from Jimmy Dore. It's just like um uh, you know like things are bad and you should be angry, and then it's just that message over
yeah,
and so I don't know what
yeah,
people expect to sort of gain from that.
yeah. And there was a time in which, like, it was summer 2019 when I was kind of having my own political awakening, and I was really getting into progressive media. And like Kyle Kalinske was kind of like my gateway drug into that community. And I still like him; he's still my favorite to this day.
Oh,
But I also was really into Jimmy Dore for a bit, and the thing is, like, he says a lot of things that I agree with, but it got to the point where it's just like anyone who disagrees with him in the slightest and like calls him out on it,
right.
like is like an MSNBC shill by
Yeah,
default.
right.
Yeah, and it's gotten to the point where he's just like he's done nothing but really divide the left, and
Right.
he's I do think he's still of value because I think everyone on the left, regardless of like what your specific label is or what your theory is concerning strategy, theory of change, that kind of thing, I think we are all valuable in a sense. We all have something to contribute, whether it be through our own ideas, like bringing new ideas to the table, or if we're just there, like raising our voices saying, we're here and we're in support of this cause. I think we're all valuable in that sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, i- i- if certain ideas are getting out there, like if someone's not like a Jimmy Dore stan, but they maybe heard one of his things and comes away with it thinking like, yeah, we should have Medicare for all. I guess that is better than not. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's the response I got a lot from people, just like random people online who were supportive of the force the vote idea. If I like at first I was sort of like, okay, I don't know, should we do this? I'm not sure. And I was like, I would ask people like, so it's probably not going to pass if we if we get them to do it. What's
Yeah.
what do we do then? Like what's that part of the plan? And then people would just come at me with like vitriol, and it's like, all right, I'm sorry I questioned like the special boy.
Yeah. Well, like, well, here's like my view on force the vote. Like, force the vote, I think it could, like, I do not think it would necessarily pass. If it does, awesome. But, like, more than likely it won't. But from what I could tell, like, because basically, if we just stick to, like, saying, oh, we have this support for Medicare for all in Congress and just like, show, like, the sponsors list or the co sponsors list,
Mhm.
that doesn't really mean anything. If we actually have, like, a vote for it, we have a list of names. Like, we have a list of names of who to go after next,
Right.
electorally. So like that's the part of force the vote that I think is actually a good idea. But I do see the argument from the other side of that equation saying that, this could potentially backfire. Like by withholding, like I didn't know this until very recently. It's not just like the Democratic caucus that picks the speaker, it's all of Congress that picks them. So even though like the Dems have the majority, if like the squad had like withheld their vote from Pelosi, then like Kevin McCarthy could have been speaker. So I did definitely see how it could have backfired. I definitely see how it could have worked. I'm more on the side of force the vote, but I try to like I understand why people who are against it, like why they're against it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm all for like, calling up our representatives and telling them what to do. Like that's that's what we should be doing. Um
Yeah,
the I think there should be like a little more forethought in terms of because like the co-sponsor thing, yeah, it doesn't it's not like a binding thing or anything, but if um if like a overwhelming majority is on the co-sponsor list, it becomes a much harder to push aside. And I think I think next month they're going to be um you know doing another like whatever it is, they like have to do this again every year or something if a bill hasn't gone through, but like they're going to do like the co-sponsor roll call again. And if Jimmy Dore had instead been telling his listeners, like, call your representative if they're not on the co-sponsor list already and tell them to co-sponsor at this time, that actually might have done more, even though that isn't uh, a binding thing. It's not like the end goal. It is like a way to get it in the minds of the public and of the representatives.
yeah, totally agree.
So yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, like I yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
but like I think the ultimate side, like I was meant to point out earlier, I think like the best sign that like co-sponsors doesn't really mean anything unless you really try to try to like when they renew the co-sponsors list, you know. But but like I was saying, I think the ultimate proof that it doesn't mean anything is like Kamala Harris was like I think the first co-sponsor in the Senate for Bernie's specific bill, and then she would boast that early in the primary, and then when she got the slightest bit of pressure from her donors on Wall Street, she backed off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
then there was a leaked transcript from a speech she was giving to a speech she was giving in the Hamptons, I think it was. And she said, "Yeah, I was never really too sure about Medicare for all or like Bernie's bill."
yeah.
So
Uh,
like yeah, I think there can be a lot of benefits even if it fails, like from just like having like the vote.
yeah. I mean, what I would say to that is like, yeah, of course, like, um, the anyone can say I co-sponsor and it doesn't mean anything. But there's
Yeah,
also something to be said for like, um, the way someone votes on something doesn't necessarily mean anything either, because like a lot of the time, um, It well, not a lot of so if let's say, like, we did force the vote and we got them to actually withhold their votes from Pelosi, and then Pelosi brought the thing for a vote. We got to that point. Um, if it did somehow pass, like, it wasn't gonna pass the Senate, Trump wasn't gonna sign it. Biden said, maybe he'll turn on this, I don't know, but, like, he said a while ago that he would veto it. Um, so
yeah,
in that case, like, the representatives know that. So, that's another opportunity
yeah,
for
very
people to be
true.
like, "Yes, I think we should do this," and, it's not gonna still not gonna happen. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's there's a lot to be said for, like, getting a Democratic majority in both houses and the presidency, because then, um, you can see how people act when there's a chance of it happening, you know?
yeah. Honestly, when it comes to like the fact that we now have like in a technical sense like a Senate majority,
Yeah.
I mean, like we may have like leadership control. Chuck Schumer now controls what gets voted on, but with people like Joe Manchin, you might as well still have like a Republican majority when it comes to like actually getting policy done. I mean,
Right.
we might actually get like a vote on $2,000 checks, but
Mhm.
Joe Manchin has said that he's not for that. Mark Warner, one of my senators, said, like he's not for $2,000 checks because both Bernie and Trump are for it. So yeah, the two extremes agree on it. So it can't be good, can it? Like it's like the
That's
most
a Democrat.
stupid line of reasoning ever.
Yeah, that's a Democrat. That senator.
Yeah,
Oh, shit.
like
Yeah.
very very centrist. And yeah,
It's,
my senators are yeah Mark Warner and Tim Kaine. So you can imagine.
yeah. Um. Yeah. Yeah. It's insane. I mean, and that's another thing, though. It's like, um, with the sort of a lot of the force of the vote people were from the Movement for People's Party, and I think that when you have two senators who are probably holding up a lot of progress, maybe we focus on primaries in those areas,
Yeah,
um, instead of
the issue is yeah. Or like
sorry.
go ahead. Sorry.
I
Like
was gonna say, yeah, just focus
what I
on
was saying.
these
Yeah.
direct primaries, like instead of jumping ship and uh, kind
Yeah.
of start from the ground up.
Yeah. But like the issue with Virginia, like it just recently kind of became a blue state. Like it was more or less like back and forth. It was a very purple state until like the Trump era. Like for the first time in forever, when it comes to our gubernatorial elections, we usually swing back and forth between, you know, Democrat and Republican pretty regularly. But we recently had Terry McAuliffe, and now we have Ralph Northam like right after instead of a Republican. We flipped both of our state houses, both our House of Delegates and our state Senate, for the first time in like 20 years. And so, like, it recently became a blue state. So, like, I guess, like, if you're talking about specifically about Virginia, that will probably be a longer process. I am excited for this next gubernatorial election that is having this year. Virginia is one of very few states that has elections every single year. So like we're having a gubernatorial election this year, and self-described Democratic Socialist Lee Carter is running for governor.
Yeah, yeah, I saw
And
that. That's awesome.
yeah, and because of how it works, you know, Virginia, the governor cannot have two terms. It's one term and then you're done.
Wow.
So uh, yeah, he's like so Lee Carter's running on an even field.
Right.
You know, where everyone is potentially a new candidate. But I don't know like I've seen like some things about like Terry McAuliffe planning on running again, which I fucking hope not,
Yeah, that's
because
crazy.
he's definitely one of those like anti-Bernie to the end. Like there was this like meeting of like anti-Bernie Democrats early in the primary discussing how they would like take him on. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Um
uh, what state are you from?
I'm from New York originally, but I've also lived in Connecticut and Pennsylvania, and now I live in Boston.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
So you have Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren as your senators.
Yeah, so it's nice, most of the stuff that comes up, um, when people are like, call your senators, I'm like, they're both up for it. Like, it's pretty
Yeah.
convenient. Ayanna Presley is my representative. Um,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
yeah, our governor is a Republican. That's uh, it's a weird split here. Like, I think the governors tend to be Republican. Like Mitt Romney was the governor. Um, and the
There's also Bill Weld.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly. Like it seems like almost always um, Republican governors, and then like I think the state house and Senate are pretty uh, Democrat leaning. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think
Mhm.
like focusing on state and local stuff is a good way for people to get involved, because I think it is really frustrating and people kind of lose their minds over the national stuff because it's really hard to change it. um, and I think
Yeah.
doing remarkably well considering that. So I think that as long as
Yeah.
people still like you know, pay enough attention to the national. It's like, yeah, go look at what's happening in your city and state because, that occurred to me a few weeks ago. I was like, oh yeah, I should see. And we're getting a new mayor because Marty Walsh is going to be the labor secretary, and we're
Mhm.
getting um, probably a at least a couple of new city councilors because one of the like the city council president was appointed as interim mayor, and then two other city councilors are going to run for mayor. So it's like, oh yeah, there's all this stuff happening here. So like, should really make sure we lock that down too because uh unfortunately the way that it kind of works in the US is like most things don't go national until a few states have done them. Which is why
Yeah.
marijuana and gay marriage and slavery and like civil rights, like all these things. There has to be a little bit
Yeah.
of momentum first. And yeah, there's a bill in the state house here for single payer. Like there's, if people just do a little bit of digging, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. Well, since you brought it up, give us a little bit of insight into Marty Walsh because, um, you know, most of Biden's cabinet picks I've had plenty of issues with, but he's had a couple good ones here and there, like his HHS secretary nominee is the current uh, Attorney General of California, and he's for Medicare for all.
Oh yeah.
Marsha Fudge isn't a terrible pick. I don't know much about her, but basically what I know about her, she was one of the Democrats in the House that voted for that 10% military budget cut, earlier in the spring, and so like she has some common sense, right? And yeah, like he's had a few good ones. So like, what is Marty Walsh like? Do you think he will do a good job as labor secretary? Because I know nothing about him other than he's the mayor of Boston.
Yeah, I don't know that much about him either, honestly. I think you know, Boston's like a pretty like progressive city in terms of policy. I think there's a lot of, racism and stuff here, but um in terms of like uh uh, city policies, like we have really good public transit. He might have been a
Hmm.
good choice for that. And the state has one of the highest minimum wages. I think it's like 12.75 now. Um Yeah, and I think, like, when it comes to, like, COVID, which has been most of my experience with Marty Walsh as a mayor, because I moved here, 2 years ago, um, uh, it's been, I think, better than most places. There's still a lot of complaints that I have because, like, everywhere in the US is like, "Well, we gotta, keep some stuff open because because of money."
Yeah,
Like, I don't Um, so yeah, I don't know. It seems like a weird choice for labor, honestly, because he's not really known for that, I don't think. Um, but we'll see. Maybe there's
yeah,
something that I've missed.
yeah, and like that. Yeah, yeah, and on the COVID thing, yeah, it's been weird because like we've had to keep some businesses open because of money, and because for the entirety of the pandemic until today, and we could talk about that too. We've had a president who is not willing to do mask mandate. He's not willing to do any of the things that all the other developed countries have done to keep their people afloat. I think like Germany like fully nationalized wages
Yeah,
until like the end of the until the end of the pandemic. And Japan managed to keep their death count under 1,000 for a while by like closing minimal businesses, like closing the ones in which you would have to take a mask off, like restaurants. But like they had a mask mandate, like just like a giant mask mandate, and yeah, they kept it at a low death count for a while. And there are some countries that I think did both. And
yeah,
so and now I guess we can talk about uh, the fact that we now have President Biden as of noon today.
right.
And did you watch the inauguration a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. I watched little a little before, maybe like kind of half an hour before they did the swearing in. Um, to like a little bit after. Saw Lady Gaga and J Lo. Uh, so yeah, it was what I expected, I guess. I was a little worried that there would be some kind of attack, but luckily there wasn't.
Yeah, there's always that. Like, I considered it very unlikely, like, because I heard, because there's like some news shows that I watch that are taped in Washington D.C., like in studio, and then a lot of those shows had to be done like over like a virtual call, because like DC is like on lockdown. It's a fortress at this point. And so like, the level of security that went into it, I thought like, okay, there probably won't be anything happening on this particular day. If someone tries anything, I don't think it'll succeed. But
Yeah.
I saw Joe Biden's speech. Nothing really memorable. It's the same platitude word salads that we've mostly gotten from him. I saw a thing on Twitter. It's just like, what like should the Biden drinking game be? Like
Right.
take a shot every time he says unity, or
Yeah.
take a
Deal.
shot every time he says restore, or like take a
Right.
shot every time he says here's the deal, Jack.
Right. Yeah. Uh,
But
some of the first few things he's planning to do sound good. Um, some of
yeah,
the executive orders he's doing today, or like reversing some of Trump's. I think we seems like they actually got some concessions out of him. It's like it makes sense for Bernie to be in the room. um,
yeah,
like when people call Bernie a sellout and stuff, I'm like, I don't know what you expected, but like we're gonna get more than we would have if he was like, "Fuck you, Biden, I'm I'm going green" or whatever.
yeah. And also like, and same thing can be said for, because I don't know how much truth there is in Biden saying, oh, like I really considered tapping Bernie for labor secretary.
Yeah,
But like I think he'll do much better. He'll be able to do much more as budget chairman, because like if he was, made labor secretary, Vermont has a GOP governor, and that would have really jeopardized the Senate majority, and we wouldn't that really would have jeopardized anything. Like, McConnell would still be the majority leader. And so I think he'll be like, he's doing more good simply by just staying in the Senate, and then like he'll be able to add on to that as budget chair. And it's
right.
also been very hilarious watching all of these conservative assholes like lose their shit over the fact that Bernie is now the budget chair. Like Lindsey Graham was like saying like, oh, if we lose Georgia, Bernie's gonna be the budget chair, but if we win Georgia, I'm gonna be the budget chair. It's like, if I
Well,
wasn't gonna vote for Warnock and Ossoff, before, I'm doing it now, and I
yeah,
don't really like Ossoff at all. Warnock is cool.
it's
Like,
okay.
yeah, Warnock, I kind of wrote off as a centrist early on, but then like the more I saw like his sermon videos, like it's like this guy ain't bad. But Ossoff, I pretty much learned everything I needed to know about him in that one. There was an interview in which he was asked like rapid fire questions about like, are you in favor of this stuff? Like,
Yeah,
are you in favor of Medicare for all? No. Are you in favor of Green New Deal? No. Are you in favor of defunding the police? No. Like, okay, that's all I need to know about him.
yeah, pissed me off. Yeah, he ran like a few years ago. I think it was 2016 or something. He ran for one of the Senate seats, and like he just seemed so like maybe he changed a little this time, but back then he was very like Republican light to the point where all of his
Mm,
ads were him saying like, "I'm going to Washington to cut wasteful spending," and I was like, "What are you talking about? Like this is insane."
yeah,
And I guess that's sort of
it's
like
it's yeah,
the like Bill Clinton style shift that took place in the Democratic Party, where Democrats started being like,
yeah,
"Yeah, no, we're like Reagan too. We want to cut cut spending."
yeah. And like we saw the same with the Kentucky Senate race as well. Like both with Amy McGrath and also the race back in 2014. Back in 2014, I think it, yeah, 6 years. was like, yeah, 6 years ago was last time McConnell was up for re-election. Like this, like I saw one of the campaign ads from back then, and like she was shooting guns. It looked like a Republican ad,
Right.
shooting guns, saying I'm pro-gun. Like I'm not a huge fan of Obama.
Right.
Like she was like refusing like Obama's endorsement, that kind of thing. And then Amy McGrath, basically her message was Mitch McConnell is getting in the way of Trump's agenda. I want to work with Trump. And even though like potentially like even after if she was potentially elected, Joe Biden would have been elected. So it's like are like what are like mixed signals from her. Whereas like
Uh,
or not Corey, that Charles Booker. Charles Booker was the real deal, I think. And
yeah.
honestly, like I don't get it. So like didn't they have like one voting location for like all of like I forgot the name of the county, but like Louisville is in there, and it like had the state half the state's black population. Like if they had opened, like if they had more polling places open, I would think if you wanted to spread out the population to prevent the spread of COVID, you would open more precincts. You know,
Right. Yeah. Well,
and
that's that we have a government that values voting and human rights.
yeah,
It's like, yeah, I mean, I think that's I think Democrats do it too, but probably not to the same extent. But that's just like a reality of Republican led states is that they
yeah,
they slash the number of polling booths or polling places, and it's like, yeah, there's really no justification for it, and it um is it always just like mostly hurts black people. Um
yeah,
and
and
yeah, it's insane.
yeah. Many of these states in the South should like theoretically be more progressive because they have all these southern states like Kentucky, South Carolina,
They're all poll.
Georgia, Louisiana. They should theoretically be more progressive because they have huge African American populations, but they're still very crippled by like the aftermath of Jim Crow, and they still have many of these voter suppression laws in place. So
Right.
like if we had removed those, we yeah, like I do think we could have like maybe had a governor Stacey Abrams, for sure. And like especially since like Brian Kemp was like he was Secretary of State of Georgia, and he was overseeing that election, and he was like intentionally like throwing people off the voter rolls.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's insane because that's just like standard practice now.
yeah,
Um, like it's barely noticed. Like that's what happened in 2000 in Florida. Um, is there was this whole oh yeah, the book is The Best Democracy Money Can Buy by Greg Palast. It's really good, like great like investigative journalist piece. Um, and basically Jeb Bush's office, because he was governor at the time,
yeah,
hired this consulting firm or whatever to, you know, go over their voter rolls and just like massively purged black people, listed people as felons, mostly black people who weren't. And um like it was such a mess. And they were just, they got away with it. And now they just do that.
yeah. Uh, so now I want to ask you a few questions about like what about like your podcast. So it's called Radicalize Me. Um, so like what is like the goal of your podcast? So like what is and like what do you do on the podcast to try to accomplish that goal?
Yeah, so the original idea, and it's still mostly centered around this, is uh just getting activists on to talk about what they do and what organization they work with and kind of how they got started. And then if listeners want to get involved in that cause, what could they do? Because I think when when the pandemic hit, uh and like just shit went down with my job and everything, uh that like pushed me over the edge. Like um there was definitely it's been like a decade now of a gradual radicalization for me because being disappointed with the Obama administration, um, getting some hope from like the Occupy movement, and then Bernie running, like that
Yeah.
all started to like bring me way over to the left. And then yeah, like March 2020, it just just dragged me all the way over because I was like, this is insane. Like now I'm really seeing how bad things actually are because the um our capitalist system has completely failed to like uh manage this pandemic. um my job like opened too early with the rest of the state, and they didn't care about anything we had to say. I got all my coworkers together and we were like, you need to pay us more, you need to test everybody, you need to do this, and they didn't do any of it. um and like I really would have liked to unionize, but I think a lot of people quit, and we kind of just lost steam. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, so all this shit started to happen, and I was like, all right, I've always sort of like I've always been tuned into this stuff. I've always sort of known what's going on, and I have a good idea of what I don't like and how I want things to be, but I don't know how to participate in that. But beyond voting, because this was also when uh, Bernie had the primary ripped from his hands again. Um,
Yeah.
and I was like, yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to just like, I think voting's part of it, but I don't think we can just vote in the the socialist revolution.
Yeah.
So that's why I started doing the show, and then I you know started reaching out to people, and just talking to people who are either at like on the ground kind of people, in protests and that kind of stuff, or people who work in organizations like Sunrise, and I've had a couple of like journalists on. So I think I've definitely fulfilled this part of it, and we'll continue to that. It my podcast feed is a place people can go and go like, I want to get involved. How can I do it? They can sort of like get a little bit of a guide there.
Hmm.
Uh, and the other thing I've been doing is you know doing a little bit of a monologue at the beginning of the show about what I believe, and as I learn and read things and come across new ideas, I bring them to the podcast and try to find interesting ways to explain them. And because it's the knowledge gap is a huge part of this. I think that um I was very focused on the activism side of it because I was like, I just want to do stuff. Like, how do we do things? I want to tell people, here's what you do, and then we go do them. And it's like, yeah, that is also part of it. But then as the more I learn about socialism, about leftism, about labor rights, about all these things, more I realize like, oh yeah, this stuff is just not out there. Like you have to like uh get into this weird zone of the internet and stuff to sort of figure out like what to read and um like what really constitutes leftism. um so there's a lot of people I listen to um who are doing this stuff now, like podcasts and YouTube videos and stuff. So I was like, I'm gonna join them. I'm gonna do that too. I'm gonna start just telling people um some of these things. And yeah, so I do that on the podcast, and then recently I launched a YouTube channel under the same name, Radicalize Me, where I do sometimes it'll be the same or like similar uh monologue that I did on the podcast. Other times it's a totally different thing. Um just to get into that medium too. There's a whole like leftist YouTube world now.
Yeah. So yeah, like I started. trying to do like YouTube and podcasting in the middle of the pandemic. I thought it would be cool. It'd be fun to hop onto that as a way to like because like now I have time to do it, and B, I like I'm a very opinionated person, and I've been increasingly putting out my political views on Instagram, and Instagram is a more like friend based community rather than like Twitter, right? And I have a lot of conservative friends, and I'm not a very confrontational person by nature, so like I figured turning to YouTube would be a real kind of a way for me to vent about my opinions
Yeah.
without necessarily like pissing off friends, you know.
Right.
So like and that's like one side of the equation, and then on top of that, I got other people, other friends of mine who are pretty far left involved in this. So like I'm only one co-host of this show. Like I'm pretty much the one. I'm the guy who like runs it. Like I do the editing, I do the uploading, and I run most of the episodes. But like I have other people because I personally do better in a more like discussion based environment. Like I'm not good at monologuing, like, and I'm not even the best at like necessarily carrying a conversation. Like I try to, but like I stammer a lot, as you probably have noticed.
Me too. It's fine.
Yeah, but yeah, and the whole point of like what I'm trying to do here is like trying to have conversations from all across the left side of the spectrum, mostly centered around like younger people, including like Zoomers, millennials. Like that's like the left lane Zoomers. Like that's kind of what that's born out of. So like it's me and my two friends, Alex and Malcolm. So like I'm a socialist. Alex is an anarchist, and Malcolm is kind of a social democrat. Like more in that vein, and and we have some good conversations now and then, but we haven't really done an episode together in a couple months. Like I don't think since the election. Uh, we've been pretty busy, so like I've been trying to look for more guests so we can get stuff on the channel, and also I want to like talk to other people who are involved in this kind of you know activity as well. And yeah, and you talked about getting people involved in activism. It's like even though I'm a freshman in college right now. Like I got involved with my local YDSA chapter here at Virginia Tech,
Nice.
and now I ended up as the co-chair this semester. So and it was more or less like our chapter is not huge, and a lot of like there's a lot of positions in leadership in this particular chapter, and they're still not all filled. And so it's like I ran for co-chair, or like I just chose to be co-chair because no one else was running for it, and like and I was I kind of had to be talked into it because I like my like I'm basically kind of like where like you described yourself. Like I was tuned into it, but I still more or less kind of have an activist perspective. I'm not so much deep in like knee deep into like theory. I'm like I have a very basic understanding of what like socialism itself is, and like most of my faith in socialism is based on like my own like values and my own principles. Like socialism is very people centric. It's like when workers control the means of production. I also look at the certain failures of capitalism, but like I'm not too familiar with like socialist theory, and I'm learning more about that at each and every day.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's I definitely believe, I have to believe this because it's true of me that you can do a show like this as like a like as a student, as a student of theory rather than as an expert.
Yeah,
Um, and I think it's good to like get out there and start talking and start putting stuff out. Um, uh, and I think a lot of people don't if they aren't like an expert yet, and it's like yeah, you don't have to be. I think it's great to like share the journey, sort of, just to have what you're putting out be like today. I'm going to talk about this because this is what I just read,
yeah,
and things spread around much faster that way.
yeah. And even like I guess like my perspective like on leftism, I think could be shared on like what most people's like perspective on leftism is, like just being like introduced into it. Because yeah, or basically saying, or like basically what I'm trying to say is that most Americans don't want to sit down and read hours and hours of theory. Like
Right.
they want, like, everyone, or most people who are tuned into politics, like their understanding of it is very like basic, but sometimes a basic understanding of politics is enough to understand, like what's screwing you over, what would help you, you know.
Right.
And I think I can, like, that kind of perspective that I'm offering could be appealing to some people. Someone, yeah, like someone who isn't knee deep in like the theory. I try to avoid using a whole lot of like intellectual lingo, which is I think a lot of people on the left are guilty of that. Like I don't go into like what dialectal materialism is, which is a term I've heard uh, regarding Marxism. I still don't know what the fuck it is, but I think it just like has to do with like material evolution or something like that. I don't know.
Right.
Like
Yeah,
it,
yeah. Well, it's I think it's just like anything else. It's like yeah, there's this academic side of it that is important because that's how, it's formalized and everything, but
yeah,
if I'm talking to people about music who aren't necessarily like, up on all the theory, I'm not going to just throw around like modal interchange and shit. Like,
yeah,
just the people are just not going to, because you're not going to like win people over that way. Um, you got to sort of, that's what's admirable about a lot of the uh, creators who are doing this. It's like, the thought slime is a funny thing to watch. It's not just a guy like telling me how anarchy works, and Vosh is like a funny cool guy. Like it's very important to have this sort of um cultural side of this down.
yeah. And that's what was like, I guess, really appealing to me about like Kyle Kalinske when I first started watching him. Is like he's very intelligent, and like
Mm,
he understands a lot of this stuff like pretty like deeply. But like when he talks about it on his show, like he's not doing some planned monologue. Like he's mostly shooting from the hip,
mm.
and like he's using uh my mic has been doing this shit all day. But like, yeah, he doesn't use a whole lot of big words. Like he always like tries, and he says this, like, talk about things as if like your worst ideological enemy is listening. Like do it in the best way, like to try to explain it, get people to understand it, and like make it, like, explain it in a way that makes it seem like it's common sense, you know and that could be a good approach to debating as well. you know like if someone says, like, why do you want Medicare for all, or like why do you want free college, you respond essentially with like, why not, you know
Right. Yeah.
and yeah,
That's a sort of rhetorical game that the left I think is getting better at and needs to get better at because that's uh it, it's I think it's probably easy to be a right wing commentator
yeah,
because there's like pretty much a script for all of them that that they just repeat these very simple things and as many as of those buzzwords and phrases they can put in a sentence is the better. And they're just these simple, like punchy things that stick in people's head. And yeah, again, like talking about um, surplus labor value is like, no, I'm not going to do that.
yeah.
Uh,
And I've also gotten plenty of practice, like doing basically what Kyle describes, like, you know talk like talking about politics as if your worst ideological enemy is listening. Because I, like, even though I try to avoid this as much as possible, you probably wouldn't know it from looking at my Instagram story, but I still like talk a lot of politics on my Instagram story. And like, I have very conservative people who follow me, so like I try to, like, I try to like keep it policy focused rather than like bringing people into the bunch because nothing really stirs up partisan divide more than like talking about specific figures from what I've observed.
That's
Yeah,
true.
you
Yeah.
just yeah, like you just stick to policy and like how like and try to like make it appeal to people on a very basic level, you
Right.
know. And I've gotten a lot of practice with it on that because like I've engaged with some actually pretty productive conversations with my conservative friends, as a result of like me posting something on my story, them posting something on their story, you know, like yeah, and honestly, yeah, if you stick to policy, I think you'll get a more honest conversation because yeah, like if you resort to like this hero worship of a like people like worship their heroes
Right.
and like if you leave the heroes out of it, there's it can be more objective in a way. Like
Right.
and I have a lot of like, more liberal friends who love Obama and I'm not the biggest fan of Obama. So like I can talk about something, like from like on a policy level that he got wrong but not specifically mention Obama. Like kind of see what I'm getting at. I'm kind
Right.
of
Yeah.
losing
Yeah. Well,
my
it's like,
train of thought.
yeah, it's like people already focus on policy sort of without realizing it. Like if you told like this, Obama fan in a vacuum, you just told them, "Hey, they're separating immigrant families and putting kids in cages." They'd be like, "Oh, that's terrible." And then if you tell them Trump's doing it, they'd maybe think it was even more terrible. But if you
Yeah.
tell them Obama did it, they might be like, "Well, the Republicans wouldn't let him do anything." So is it like
Yeah.
then there's like defending their guy. But yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it. If you do just isolate it to the policies themselves, I think people can chill the
Yeah.
fuck.
Yeah, and that's kind of was where I was trying to go. Like people will listen more if you leave their heroes out of it,
Yeah,
you know. And the same can be said, when it comes to Obama, when it comes to how he handled the Flint water crisis, his drone strikes in Syria, you can go on and on. And yeah, that's essentially what I try to do. Like I try to keep it to a more standard level in which normal people who aren't in the shit, can understand. And it can be hard sometimes,
oh, it's very hard. But
especially like when you're competing with like these post leftists who like leftism as like they like leftism as it is now as kind of like this edgy subculture
right, yeah,
and like they don't really want to expand their ideas, they don't want to spread their ideas, you
yeah,
know and they use their ideology as a way of feeling superior to people, you know it's basic like post leftism from what I've observed as of recent. It's basically this the age old argument, you know, that conservatives would use against socialists. It's like, oh, you criticize society yet you participate in it. I'm very intelligent,
yeah, yeah,
and essentially that's what post leftists do. Like, oh, you use Amazon, like, oh, you go to Chick-fil-A, that kind of thing.
yeah. Um, yeah, man. So I should probably get going. I have another interview.
Oh, that's cool. But this is like I know I'm a little awkward, I guess, in a first encounter with someone like who I've never talked to in person before.
No,
It's
it's
just
all good,
but
man.
like but yeah, maybe if we like did this a couple more times, I'll be in a more relaxed state, if we plan on maybe doing this a couple more times in the future, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be
But
down.
yeah. But yeah, I enjoy talking with you. You seem like a very intelligent guy. I'm gonna put the link to like your Twitter, your YouTube, and also like Spotify, that kind of thing, and also your website, which is radicalizemepod.com.
Yeah.
Right? I'm gonna put all that in the description of the YouTube video. So all y'all watching at home, have a good day. Have a good day. Do I call you Mr. Messina or Joe? Just
Oh, it's good. Yeah.
all right. Have a good day, Joe.
See you,